All right, Nick, let's talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. The game of the year, everyone was calling it, and so it was. But was it really? I think Alabama jumped out to an incredibly early lead, and it seems like they handled business pretty easily against the Georgia Bulldogs. And I think everyone else in the country, one guy in particular, agrees with this sentiment, and they made their decision on the spot after this game. Big news for Alabama Crimson Tide fans. I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, big decision made after this game in the favor of the Alabama Crimson Tide after seeing this dominant win. A big-time recruit has now shut down his recruiting, saying, I've seen all I need to see. Alabama is definitely the place to be. Let's jump on into the tweet and we'll talk more about it on the other side. This is from the great Hayes Fawcett over at On3 Sports. All of the greatest breaking recruiting news. It says, breaking Alabama commit Darrell Duke Johnson has shut down his recruitment. He tells me at On3 Recruits. He says, I have found my home. I love it here. I'm 100% locked in and shutting down my recruitment. Roll Tide. He is ranked as the number 2 athlete in the 2025 class per On3 Sports. Nick, I think this is absolutely fantastic for the Crimson Tide because this was the win they needed. This was the dominance performance they needed to start getting guys to come back in droves to Alabama. They've already done a pretty good job at recruiting. I'd say a great job even at recruiting. Caleb DeBoer's done really well. But to get these top tier recruits to have no question, this is the place to be. I think this is the performance and this is the first domino to fall. Curious what your thoughts are on this one, Nick. But before we get to you, Alabama fans, in the comments section below, fantastic game. Really great. They call it the game of the year already. We want to know, though, who was your MVP of this game in the comment section below? A lot of people had a lot of incredible performances, but let us know who is your MVP in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this commitment for the Tide?
So I think it's a really great sign. It's indicative of an underlying story that was missed during the game. And look, it was an incredible fourth quarter. Let's give some credit to Georgia for fighting back and taking the lead very briefly. But for basically 53 minutes of this game, Alabama was clearly superior on both sides of the football. It didn't mean they played perfectly, but they were better than Georgia. Now, look, Georgia, heart of a champion, right? They're a great team, very talented squad. Kirby Smart's a great coach, obviously. They made a few plays. Alabama's got some young guys on the back end of the defense, gave up some big plays. Made it a game, of course, down the stretch. Georgia taking the lead before Williams, and then finally the interceptions to ice the game for the Crimson Tide. But if you actually look at the stats and just take a step back from the emotion of a wild and crazy fourth quarter, I agree with you 100%. This was a dominant Alabama victory when you look at the line of scrimmage, when you look at execution. If you look at the running game, Georgia finished the game with 80 rushing yards, averaging 3.1 yards per carry. Alabama finished with a $173, averaging 5.4 yards per carry. That's physically dominant. Alabama finished the game on defense with a combined 9 tackles for loss and sacks. Georgia finished the game with only 7 combined tackles for loss and 0 sacks against an Alabama offensive line. And again, Kalen DeBoer is a much more, I'll say, progressive passing mind and game strategy mind than a Nick Saban was, even when he changed his offensive scheme later, which means normally you give up a lot more negative plays. You give up some quarterback sacks. You give up some blowing up screens in the backfield because you're generating more big plays down the field. Despite that strategic shift, Alabama was still physically superior to Georgia. It wasn't even close, right? Carson Beck had a great second half, a lot of lapses on the back end of that Alabama defense that will have to be cleaned up. But this recruit's decision to shut down his recruiting and say, yep, my commitment is secure. I want to go play for Alabama. I know a lot of people sit there and say, oh, he's excited by Ryan Williams. And look, rightly so. Williams is absolutely ridiculous. But I think it's the fact that Alabama was clearly the better team. This wasn't a case where Alabama big played them and just found a way to escape, right? Alabama was the better team for 50 plus minutes. And then when it mattered most, they still made the big plays. And I think that gets every recruit, every potential transfer target really excited. Because it's one thing if you barely eke it out because your quarterback went off, right? Something like that. Or you have one superstar receiver who just had a career game, something like that. Alabama was physically superior to Georgia. That's what's being missed in the after the game chatter by everything on ESPN, Fox Sports, all the talking heads. But the reality is Alabama was better coached. They were smarter. They were physical, more physical on offense, defense, and special teams, and they made the big plays. They're clearly the better team, and I think we're going to see more commits, more recruits, similar to what we're seeing with this latest news about everyone recognizing that Georgia is not the new top dog, no pun intended. Alabama is still right there with them, and maybe even still better than them.
Yeah, Nick, and I think RG3 kind of said it best in his, post-game tweets, comments after. He said, this was Kalen DeBoer's I'm the captain now game. He came out and said, Nick Saban, great coach, but this is how I do things, and it still works. Alabama, still, like you said, top dog. Really, really great performance by Alabama. And I think I talked about recruiting earlier, and I think this is really important to hit on, that Alabama has gotten everyone from everywhere. But this is the first guy, Eastman, Georgia. They go into the Bulldogs' own backyard. And I think this guy really finally was just like, listen, Alabama, Georgia, great place to play, great place to be, but Alabama is where I want to be. Alabama is where the best players are. And I think having a dominant win over Georgia like this really helps sell that to all other recruits. Can Alabama go into the state of Georgia, their number one competition, not even in the SEC, but all of college football right now? Can they go into their own backyard and get some of the best players in the country out of there? Absolutely. Yes, they can. I think this is big news for Alabama. And I think going forward, we're going to see them get even bigger and bigger recruits as they go on.
And I think you bring up one final point there, is that this is going to have national implications in the recruiting and transfer game, because everyone who's looking to win a national title, at least for the last 7-8 months ever since Saban retired, all eyes have been shifted to Georgia. Okay, they're the number one team, clear favorite. That's what the odds makers said too. It wasn't just them, it was the money in Vegas. Now the eyes are going to shift right back to Tuscaloosa. This was a huge victory by DeBoer to kind of reset that narrative, and it should have massive implications for the future.